Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Just Another Kill Team podcast, connecting kill team communities across the globe. If you're passionate about the tactical skirmish game that brings together strategy, lore, and creativity, you are in the right place. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and stay updated with our latest episodes. If you want to support the show, check out our Patreon. Your support means a lot to us. Follow us by using the social media links in the podcast description for all the latest news, and be sure to leave a review to let us know what you think.
Yeah, we're back with Red, who was my co-TO at Adepticon, and one of the you guys run a fairly large 40K podcast, as far as 40K podcasts go, right?
Yeah, Forge the Narrative. Yeah, it's I'm just a minor cast character in that show. I've been on it for a few years now. A few, maybe closer to 5, but Paul and Adam and Tanya are co-hosts. Paul's really the lead on the show, and Adam's the competitive way in, and then I get to jump in occasionally with my military meanderings. And Tanya is an awesome newer player to 40K. She's also an amazing painter, probably the best painter out of all 4 of us. And so lots of good back and forth on 40K, and we talk some lore things and whatnot. But yeah, it's a pretty good show. I've enjoyed my time on it.
Yeah, being able to cover a breadth of topics just because you guys all have different perspectives. Whereas like me and Jason are out here talking to Kill Team TOs about our own little communities and growing our own little seeds in the wilderness.
Well, I mean, it's cool. Kill Team has... this is 3rd edition, and how it's come along. And then, I played, Shadow Wars Armageddon, which was kind of like the precursor. And I liked it. I mean, I liked the direction that it was going, and I've loosely, it's difficult. You hear some folks, it's difficult to keep all these different game systems going. And so, sometimes I totally understand the cognitive burden or attention span that goes along with just sticking with one game, and how you can build into that. But it's been exciting for me as I've just recently jumped into this Kill Team, especially with the new edition as it came out. So
yeah, riding the wave of the new edition.
Yeah, so it was like with the new edition is kind of mostly when you started to get into it. You kind of told us a little bit about it, but let's a quick rundown for the audience on where you started, how you got into it, where you're headed.
Yeah, well, and so just to show kind of time span and everything, I've been playing 40K for probably about 2 decades now. And so I've got a wide range of experience with that, and I've loved all the different war games. I mean, I play 30K, I play Legions, Imperialis, so on and so forth. But then, Travis, I think we first met at the Tacoma Open, right?
Yeah.
And I think you were TOing
that was like
there.
last year. GW pulled me in. I ran the 90-person GT while like my hair was lighting on fire, but it was good. It was fun.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get that. I feel that. And so I met you there, and then I want to say about 6-ish months ago, in preparation for a while, we were looking. The team was looking ahead to Adepticon. The leaders, the team leads at GW reached out to me and said, "Hey, could you help with Kill Team?" And I was like, I don't really play it right now. I've looked at it, and I got a lot of the terrain and stuff because I play Imperial Agents, so I already own technically 3 or 4 kill teams right off the gate right there.
If you bought I think that's like one of the weird combat patrols where you're like, this is actually also a box for kill team.
It sure is. It really is. And because I love the Arbites, I know Navy Breachers don't show up on the meta map right now, but I've got them. I've got 30 of them. And so I've got like all sorts of build outs, And but anyway, so they brought it up to me, and so about 6 months ago I agreed, and I started learning. And honestly, I started listening. Travis, you gave me some YouTube kind of introduction material. You also showed me to this podcast, which I have now listened to all the episodes, and it was a really great I started all the way back, way back, and just from the beginning. And I've listened to your whole the discography here. And so it's been cool to kind of see y'all's journey up to this point and like where you've gone and then all the different people you've talked to. And then it gave me a lot of background on the history stuff. Travis, as you saw when I showed up at Adepticon, I was like, well, I've played games. I've not actually participated in a competitive event myself in that regard. And I've not TO'd in, that was my debut TO event for Kill Team. But I only knew third edition. I'd heard things about second edition clearly and everything that y'all talked about, but I only really knew the book as of third edition. And it was a really interesting time for me as someone who loves war games and how rules play into things and how important they can be, especially from edition sets and how people are between old editions and new editions. So
Yeah, it was actually one of the better, I think, for new TOs who are listening, or even just TOs in general, even us experienced TOs, one of the fun things that I saw happen at Adepticon was, you just read the rule in front of the player and then ask if there's anything else that's extra, because sometimes there are more rules on the internet, you've got errata or something, but sometimes you just read the rule wherever it's the most relevant all the way through, and you're like, does that explain everything? Most people are like, yeah, that does explain it. You're like, cool, all right, we just got to read the whole block of text, because this is something that comes up a lot, especially for newer players. So it's kind of a common like stumbling block. People will think that in GW you just read to whatever makes the most sense for you to finish, and then you skip the rest of the text. Because why would I need more text to get the idea? I got the idea. But if you finish reading the other block of text, generally it'll explain the whole concept.
Right.
I think it comes up in like missions. Someone's like, can I do, like, if I search this, do I have to search this again next turn? And if the next like sentence is search this turn, you score 1 VP, and they're like, I see.
Yeah.
Like, cool. Well, but it's just one of those things that people have to learn.
Right. And really, as someone who's TO'd lots of other events and for different game systems, that is kind of, it's funny. You brought up when we were kind of preparing. I know we didn't get a chance to really talk much before Adepticon, but you'd mentioned like first principles and things like that. And in my first principles of TOing anything, that's really my go-to process for a lot of these things, because just bringing up and reading the rules, like you said, just reading the whole thing, completing the entire material, reading through that, it's so essential. And we try to have these heuristics and these biases that we just, okay, we've done it so many times, therefore we must be valid, because why would we have gotten this wrong if we've done it 200 times, 300 times? And then to realize that, well, yep, we've been doing it wrong, and we just need to go by what exactly is in the text right in front of our face. So, but at the same time, I mean, and that was the awesome part about doing it. Honestly, having you, for me, I was very much in the apprentice side of the Kill Team TO position here, because having listened to y'all on the show, and even remember the squig the squig bomb came back up, right? And I remember listening to that y'all had talked about it in a previous episode, but it still came up in conversation just because of some of the other sequencing and things that we were looking at. And so it was really good to have you there with your experience, because some of that nuance, it doesn't matter how much I read the book until we just get the opportunity to see it play out and then have that experience combined, that's such an important combination. And so it was really good.
And Jason, you were there playing at Adepticon. How did you feel about the whole TOing situation? Did it feel like Red was a little inexperienced? Did it feel like there was a little bit more experience coming in from his years of playing 40K?
No, I mean, it seemed like everything was really, really smooth. I mean, I wasn't like a part of a whole lot of judge calls, but it seems like the people around me, like someone called for a judge, like one of you guys came over quickly and it was like resolved quickly, and like everything from what I saw looked like it was going really smooth and looked like it was going really well.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I mean, I know, I mean, Travis, fortunately, we were able to catch any of my mistakes that I may have made and address those, without hopefully any significant impact. But they weren't huge ones, I don't think. And I do, I also appreciate it was nice that I was able to I was able to when an issue came up, I was able to address it and then make a call, and then I could come back to you to kind of double check and make sure that I wasn't I hadn't gone off base or something, or missed something, or messed it up. And so that was really helpful.
I think,
but it was good.
I think that's actually a good point for anyone who's kind of on the fence of oh, do I want to be the person that starts the kill team group in my area? Just because, a lot of our listeners are probably competitive people, and a lot of competitive players have the issue of, I don't have enough people to play, or I'm only going to these bigger tournaments. But starting your own scene is kind of a little spooky. And one of those big things is being able to take ownership of mistakes, because we don't always make things perfect. And if people get mad at you, it can feel a little, not fun. But
yeah,
if you're going to have and grow the scene and have more than just, your local play group, sometimes you just got to take ownership of those situations and kind of push it along a little bit. And that's kind of a scary thing to do when you're new to these games.
TOing, in general, especially if you're TOing for a new scene, no one there really knows what's going on fully, and the questions that people are asking, they don't know the answer to. So if you don't know the question, you don't know the question, but if you don't know the answer as well, that's perfectly fine. You just read the rules and make a call, and then if you find out later, it's that game still resolved the way it did, and then you just know better for next time, and that's not the end of the world at all. The amount of times in the first 2 years that I was running events and making judge calls of Kill Team for the 2021 edition that I just blatantly ruled things wrong is you could write a 100-page book about it. I think it took us 6 months to know that if you're on a Vantage, you can't shoot someone in heavy cover.
No, I mean, and that's exactly right. There's so much to these things, and especially Adepticon, being as big of an event as it has been and as it was, as I hope it will continue to be. I'm sure it's one of those things where I've always tried to help myself and the players and folks see that it really is this journey. It's not there's no definitive moment at which anything's the end. And so just because Adepticon is this amazing event that had all these great things going on, that doesn't have to be such a stopping point or what have you, that it's just one step along the way, and that the ability to just keep moving forward, because there's going to be more opportunities. You're going to spend more time with folks. And that's where, it was really cool that there was, Travis, we had 80 plus people in the GT, I think.
Yeah, I think we had 90 signed up and 80-ish showed up. It was a good turnout.
It was. And I'd say about a third of them, rough statement, but a third of them expressed that it was their first big competitive event, which I mean, that's awesome. That's great. And that's a great standard. If you were going to tell someone who was really, going to go down the Rocky path of trying, and by Rocky, I mean Rocky Balboa, of trying to build up to being the world champion or something, going to all events is great. Going to RTTs, going to all these different events is good, because it's all reps and practice and opportunities to learn and grow. But going to a big event is something that it's always nice to kind of check off the bucket list, to say I was able to play and compete in this, and I learned these things from it, and I'm going to do better next time at this, this, and this. And so it's very important to have that journey mindset and not get held up on one thing, whether TOs make mistakes or players make mistakes.
Everyone makes mistakes. The goal is that you want to make as few mistakes as possible and take ownership of wherever the mistakes are. And especially in, for competitive games, especially in Warhammer, in Magic, I think, and for some of these other competitive card games, it's a little bit more defined, and you can trust that the rules are going to do most of the back and forth with your opponent. But in Warhammer, because we have to interact with each other and we have to look at each other's measurements, there is a lot more human back and forth. And sometimes we also have to do a better job about being better humans.
That's right. There is something of a social contract, right? Kind of that you have when you're shaking hands with someone across the table, and some of the things that you have to agree upon. There's just, as you said it, there's not. While I will say, in regards to many other games, Kill Team does have a very, I think I mentioned to you before, very discrete rule system and how it is blocked in, and in regards to other war games, but it is definitely still very much a war game and not, like you said, Magic or chess, right? Like you don't just get to move across an 8x8 board exactly as each thing. As there's some things that you're going to have to, you may have disagreements with because humans are part of the equation here.
Yeah. And, for anyone going to these big tournaments, I always remind them that it's important to be able to feel confident in calling a TO, because if the TOs don't hear what's going on, you're not going to be able to see what's going on. So when you go to these large tournaments and there's an issue, always try to raise it earlier rather than later so that the tournament organizers can get a sense for where the problems are so they can try to get ahead of the problems. Because it's not really this player did something wrong, they're a bad person. It's really that this player might have made a mistake. And we want to make sure that mistake doesn't happen going forward and kind of like moving forward along the tournament. But if we don't know, they don't know. And that's always very spooky as a tournament organizer.
Right. Well, and I've been doing it, being a TO or judge for long enough that like I've gotten over. Initially, I used to feel not so good about it when I found out that there was something that I could have done if someone had just called me. But like at this point, like it really is there's part of like the community culture and education of helping people understand like it's okay to call a judge and it shouldn't be a challenge to someone else or the other person across the table to call a judge, which is difficult sometimes, especially when there's a dispute. Now, saying that, and as a judge, an approach that I take, and a lot of times, and I do like for players to be able to work stuff out as well. And so when I show up, a lot of times I offer the initiative to the players, acknowledging that they have to play again or they have to continue playing with each other. And so sometimes an amicable thing can be worked out. But I'll initially start by pointing out like, hey, it's on, if there's a disagreement, I'll go ahead and point where I feel that this person has the right of way. Well, I'm sorry, you've explained the situation, and while you said your intent, the model isn't where you said it was, and it's clearly doesn't fit this part of the rules, and therefore is a ruling. If your opponent wants to give it to you, that's on him, but I'm telling you that it doesn't look like it fits there. And so there's a pretty clear deal that then it still allows player agency for them to agree and move through that. And that's just kind of the way it goes in some cases. And I think that it's powerful to allow the players to feel that just as much as it is to know that a judge is going to come in there and help with ruling specifically.
Yeah, I've done something similar. A lot of the times, part of the reason why I tell people they want to be clear when you're saying intent is so that other people around you can also kind of hear. That way, sometimes you can like stop by as a tournament organizer and be like, did anyone else hear this? And if, one other person heard it, then it becomes a little less of a both players were talking and we got to pick one side. And then, of course, when I'm a tournament organizer and I look at the board and something is off by, half an inch, I probably will give someone a little bit less grace than if they are like a millimeter away and they're getting shot at from the corner. And you're like, well, you guys were saying this, but maybe you didn't quite say it all the way. So verbalizing those things. Or, I've told some people in these tournaments, like, you can choose to be the perfectly silent, raw person. But if you're going to do that, then you expect that the strictness of your rulings gets cut in both directions. So if you're not going to tell anyone on intent, you're going to play the game quietly, you will get judged exactly where the board is. And if your opponent pushes back, then, it's going to be where things are.
Right.
And I've been on both sides of this equation at different points in my competitive like kill team career or like Magic the Gathering career. Sometimes it's fun to yap a little bit, and sometimes you're like, I'm just gonna play this straight, not say anything, and then when my opponent tries to make the measurement, I'm like, you're clearly out, because when we put the rulers on the floor, you're like half an inch away, and it doesn't matter how much wiggle you try to scoot around in the dark door as you're cutting the door, you're not gonna be able to make it to my guy.
Yeah, well, and that's, in a lot of cases, I find with most times when I get called in for rulings, 40K, kill team, and kill team again is much more precise, because I can look at, even though we know like the walls and everything play into it and like the setting of the terrain isn't as exact, you can tell for most part because of the way the squares are set up. And you look at these formats, and I'm Jason, following a lot with what you've talked about previously on the show about Phobos. And then also, I'm a huge fan of the brutalizing through like a pure melee approach, because I play World Eaters myself on 40K, and I love just, but you can see all that. You can see, well, if I'm here, like I could definitely make this distance. And a lot of cases where these questions come up, and Travis, in a previous one you talked about measuring, like you got to get it as close to the model when you're measuring diagonally or something like that. A lot of folks ask these questions. They're like, well, can I make it there? I was like, well, if you're kind of having to ask this question right now, we're probably so close to this that like it's easier. The easier thing is just assume that you're not right out the gate, and like when you can get there. Like it's almost so clear. But that precision is, and I appreciate when people call in for those kinds of judge rulings versus and again, I don't mind doing it because it is instrumental and educational. But I much prefer those kinds of rulings with that kind of precision and that kind of like that's at this edge of competitiveness compared to can you read my rules back to me?
Yeah. And when it comes to like precise measurement, one of the things that I like to set the example for, and I'm hoping to see more people pick this up as well, is using proxy models. So
100%.
There's a couple different ways you can go about it. If I'm like, okay, it looks like I can probably reach it where I'll be within one of the objective and I'll be able to see this target and I'll have a non-obscured angle. Then you can like place a model that is like exactly where you want it to be. And then after that, measure to see if you can get there. And then if it's clear that you're like an eighth of an inch out, then you're just like, oh, well, now I can only have one of the two things I wanted. And then you get to like visualize where the move that you want to make is, what it looks like, what you get, what you don't get. And if it's not what you wanted, then the model is still in its original position. And you like, it's just like, it's very honest. It's very clear, measured, clear cutting, kind of good practice.
So 100%. I think I saw you doing that, Jason. I saw, I learned some really great things from watching players like yourself and some of the other experienced players at the event, and things that I've picked up now. Like it's baked into my approach to this of proxy models having some extra bases to be able to like show that those pieces of movement of like what it takes to get a base around terrain versus over it, what have you. And a lot of that, I 100% that is, I would suggest that not even to just competitive players, but helping new players figure out how to go. I mean, we already, for the most part, unless you only built the exact 1-for-1 models that you built, you typically have either extra bases or you have a couple other models that you can use right away for proxy models. And I think that that's a huge help. I think that that's a great suggestion and recommend it to everybody. And I know that I've implemented it with my local area, just in it's what I've kind of built into the basics of the game of just being there, because it's such a useful tool.
I like having 1-inch discs, and then people have those slightly larger, like triangular shaped 3214 rulers that have the 3-inch, the 1-inch, and the 2-inch. But I like having these. I have like smaller, flatter ones, which I think show up in Age of Sigmar for combat range, because combat range in Age of Sigmar is a 3-inch range. And then for us on Kill Team side, those are used for like straight edges, and I use 1-inch discs for the corners and the cuts, and then I can just like walk my way over.
That's good.
Every time you just remember, anytime someone is hovering a ruler over the map, they are adding distances to themselves, which they probably aren't intending to do, but it sure does give a little bit of a benefit when your 3-inch movers get a couple, like a 5-inch mover gets an extra half an inch from time to time. So you do have to be careful about that kind of stuff.
You do, and I got to say, I appreciate the Kill Team rule set, the way that it's set up. I love War Machine, right? Another game that's out there, skirmisher game. Amazing rule set that I played from first edition and on. But what killed me in the earlier formats of War Machine that I know they're changing, that Kill Team has really capitalized on, but it has its own difficulties with, is that War Machine terrain used to just be flat pieces of, but so that you could have these degrees of precision, and I see how it worked and what made it work. But at the same time, this, I mean, Kill Team has all of this dynamic terrain, and I absolutely love it. I'm here for dynamic terrain. I'm here for Volcus. I think that I can see, it's funny when we, because we used Octarius for some of Adepticon, at the beginning. And like, it's funny, I've heard you talk about Pathfinders. A friend of mine plays Pathfinders, and the amount of heavy terrain that's present on Volcus compared to what was Octarius, like I can see where the shift occurred so dramatically in the meta, but I love the dynamic aspects of the terrain and how it's played into it. And it's something that I'm glad that we have to deal with and that we need to like pay attention to, because it's worth it. It's worth having that good looking, good present terrain, and then also having to make sure that we're measuring as accurately as we can while we're playing through it.
Yeah, I do think that I think that's really one of the killer apps for like Kill Team right now, is that we have different sets of terrain and they all kind of interact in different ways. So you have a lot more novel situations while you're playing compared to like, I've heard a lot of 40K players that were really into it before. Right now they're like, it's a little bit too flat. And I think for the competitive people, that's good because they can actually play their game and roll with their minis and not have to fight about things that they don't have an interest fighting in. But for Kill Team players, it's like, I really want to be able to look at my terrain. I want to be able to jump over things. I'm going to be able to set terrain, make traps. Like, Rattling players are playing a whole separate game that is fully unrelated to the rest of the Kill Team crowd, because they're like, how can I best trap my opponent in their deployment with 7 extra objects on the map? And I guess Hernkin Jaegers have this problem, but Hernkin Jaegers are trapped by infiltration and recon not being a good combination for 5-inch move characters. So well, there's all of these things that we get to interact with just because the game has lots of different interaction points, including 3D space.
100%. And that's I get, like you said, 40K scale and the rate at which it is. I admit that there's a part of me that bemoans the standardized approach that they've taken with the terrain layouts in 40K, mainly because, and then you look at Kill Team, and what excites me so much about Kill Team is your ability to influence and adapt to the terrain, whether it's through ladders or some of the unit abilities, Phobos's and the Reavers and their little grapple hooks, Batmaning all over the place or whatever. Like you mentioned the Rattling, the between Scarper and their ability to get around. But just throwing in things like ladders of just immediately, I mean, you're taking it's a give and take kind of deal. It's one of your 4 pieces of equipment, and arguably in some cases there could be better options, but you have to weigh that out. And the ability to adapt to your terrain, I think, is a huge aspect of Kill Team that when you look at it and you call it a skirmish game, that's not what stands out initially, I think, when you're kind of advertising the game. But I think that's a huge thing. I think it's massive, and I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah, there's in the early days, once again, we used to have a bunch of like kill zones that people made up. So people would just like take their existing collections of terrain pieces and we'd throw it on a 22x30 and like use the objectives. There is one of the little like map packs in the latest Crit Ops is just like objective placement for any other kill zone. And I've kind of been looking at those a little bit more, and like even just rearrange Volcus, but like on those different layouts, and then like where your objective markers are in a different place and things are kind of shuffled around, just kind of makes it fresh. We just had a little like tournament locally here over this past weekend, and we had 2 of the Volcus maps that we just like didn't use the map pack, and we just set something up, and it felt super fresh. And like I think from what I saw, they were like pretty well put together. Like there wasn't any like feels bad murder shooting lanes, and it was just like a fresh kind of map. And I think it would be cool to see more experimentation with the terrain, and like maybe I'll go dig out some of my old terrain again and put together some fresh kill zones and do that just kind of for fun, for throwing some curveballs. Because for people that play a lot, if there's only 6 Volcus maps and you know all of them extremely well, you're like, okay, a mine goes here, a ladder goes here, this exact operative, these 2 stand here, and then they take this corner, and they do that every time, and it's very solved. Whereas if you like start throwing curveballs and like fresh maps, like people can't do that, and I think that's very fun and interesting.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. I'm a big fan. Admittedly, I played 40K pretty competitively at one point, but I've transitioned more to playing narrative stuff, and so with that, it has freed up my options to terrain because it's not it's not these competitive layouts, and we've got all this other terrain that they don't use for competitive layouts that I love to throw out there. I mean, walls and barriers and all sorts of stuff. I mean, fortifications and things like that. And so, it does the same thing in 40K that I could totally see. I'd love to use some of that stuff that I have for a kill team board. And it's, bringing out, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but like, the old Fortresses of Redemption and the old all that kind of stuff, right? We've got trench lines, I've got martyr, Aegis defense lines, so on and so forth. And like to have all that stuff, it still plays like right into, all you got to do is just essentially do a legend, just like they've done for the 2024 crit ops pack, right? And just say, hey, this terrain does this terrain is heavy, this is light, so on and so forth. And everybody's got kind of agreement. And I'd love to see stuff like that. I'd love to see what you come up with, just like because with your experience, I could throw some stuff out there, but I'm going to miss, implications out the gate until I played the game some more and got more comfortable. But I'd love to see what you have, because that'd be awesome to review and kind of adapt myself.
I actually think that's one of the best parts about the actual rule set of Kill Team. And while it is nice that GW has given us all of the terrain packs, we played a whole edition where we just kind of made stuff up on the go, and people still had a pretty good time. So one of those big starting points, if you don't have enough Volcus terrain to run tournaments, one of the things that you could just do is just make sure you have enough stuff that is coded as heavy, so that at least people aren't getting blown up on the first moves. And I think that's probably maybe the more important thing for people enjoying the game of Kill Team. Because you just want to make sure that all of your decisions kind of have some point along the way. So making everything light in your deployment is probably not good, but everything else can work pretty well. And I know locally in New York, one of the tournaments, and one of our patrons, Matt, has been setting up tournaments, and he has a couple more, nondescript kill zones. So having Octarius, but I think if Octarius by itself doesn't have enough heavy, you could just add a couple more heavy barricades in it, and it would probably work out just fine in the current edition of Kill Team. And, locally, we did a tournament, I think, in February, where we're like, all right, it's been like 4 months of playing on the current edition of Kill Team. Let's change it up a little bit. So we added in, or we just like tilted all the Volcus maps. So I just shuffled everything, and nobody really had any specific bad things to say about it. And they were like, oh, this is nice. It's nice that after 4 months of just playing on the same 6 maps, we can do something different. And I know we had Alexa on here a ways back, and Alexa was talking about, his new map pack, and I think we linked it at the time. There's definitely things that people can go try to get some new experiences into the Kill Team hobby when you're looking at new maps.
Yeah, I need to go look at that map pack. I remember y'all mentioning that. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I would encourage anyone that hasn't, to go look that up, because it was pretty neat.
I'm still kind of, I wish, and I know I've heard it, and it's just, I have not even played it, so I just don't understand. I get it from how we've talked conceptually, but and I'm sorry, I'll probably butcher it, but Beta Decimal as a terrain set,
yeah,
right? Yeah, Beta Decima, right? I love that terrain. I love the gang walks, and I've got tons of it, and I wish I could. You'd mentioned before when we talked about it, if you add in some of the supplemental stuff, it can be a good terrain. But yeah. I just want to see how to do that. I want to see how to make that thing.
So the real thing about Beta Decima is on the complete, if you were to take those maps from the actual map packs, the problem with those map packs is there's just nowhere to stage outside of where you set up your barricades, because there's nothing that runs along the catwalk. So for anyone who's still trying to make Beta Decima work, or has a set of Beta Decima and just wants to play on it, because it is a pretty fun looking set. We're talking about how Kill Team has a lot of 3D elements. Beta Decima is very 3D, because it's got a second floor, a first floor, and a bottom floor. But unlike Volcus, where you can only put 2 models in an anime fight on the very tippity top, Beta Decima has a straight up battlefield arena that you can work around on that top part. So there is a lot of room for the game to look pretty dynamic and to move around pretty dynamic. And now that jumping is not a 3-inch jump, Beta Decima has some room, but it does not have anywhere for you to go without extra terrain.
Yeah.
So we ran Beta Decima at this tilted Volcus tournament. I made sure to set the gantries onto the actual runner space. So as you're moving up those big red walkways, the gantries are smudged out a little bit so that you have a little bit of cover. So that helps a little bit. Still doesn't make the maps particularly fun because there's no cover. But if you have, for example, the big the shot glass container, as everyone like to call it. You just put that in the water and then kind of lay the boards around that. And the shot glass container gives you a lot of places to move, a lot more cover, and it's all heavy. So it becomes like a melee minefield as you're walking through. Or if you're a rattling player, you just drop mines on the battlefield and you're like, okay, you're not going through the shot trap. So you fully cut off half the map and shove everybody to the other side. But even that is still like interesting decision making. Yeah. And I think one of the ones that I thought was funny was there are the supply crates, containers, the Janitorium from the last set of Volcus, which was Mandrakes and Night Lords. And we thought those were, well, they wouldn't do anything, but they're just barely taller than the normal Beta Decima gantry. So if you put them in front of stuff, they actually add obscuring and jumping points. So you get obscuring as you're moving over, which now, before it was, I'm not getting shot for a little bit, but now it still provides something useful. So now you can get obscurity from that thing and then cover from wherever you are. So just having basically any terrain will improve the amount of movement lanes and the amount of places. So if someone is still trying to make Beta Decima work, I know New England, and you guys have been playing Beta Decima, maybe Australia, just use the narrative terrain in your tournaments, and it'll probably be a much better time.
That sounds cool. And that's with more experience, and as I get through it, my community. There's people who play, but there hasn't been anything really organized, and so I'm now with this experience. I'm trying to start to consolidate and organize the community where I can. And so we've got our first kind of learn to play event coming up, and I'm looking forward to expanding that and running with it, because I know that there's a lot of people who are interested. It's just a matter of getting it rolling. And so I'm excited to experiment with some of these things and build off of it from there.
Yeah, and I think Beta Decima is one of those ones that everyone loves to hate, but I think it is workable. It just takes a little bit of work.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna get a set. I'll give it a go. I'll come back and let you know what I think if I can figure out some other stuff.
Yeah, and from the perspective of not worrying about it being universally compatible, if I want to transform my personal copy of Beta Decima into something that I can bring somewhere and it'll be a fun and interesting board, whether it's for pickup games or if I'm even gonna bring it to the tournaments, the monthly tournaments that I'm planning to start running. I could just make something that's fun and interesting and give it a whirl, and if people hate it, then I'll quit it, and if it's kind of fun, I'll keep doing it. I would encourage other people to do the same and just kind of report back, and don't worry about it being easy to recreate. If you can make a cool board out of your Beta Decima, you're giving new life to this thing that's been struggling.
That sounds awesome.
It's one of those strengths, and really the worst part is people will just look down on it, but there's plenty of game to be played on it. It's just you need to add a little bit more. I just think out of the box, it just needs a little bit of work.
Sure. One of my things, and I know it's not everybody's favorite mechanic, but doors. I have some of the stuff from the Rogue Trader Kill Team. I can't remember what that was called, but it was the Rogue Traders versus the Gellerpox.
Oh yeah, that was the Pariah Nexus.
That was the arena boards.
Yeah, the arena boards back in the day. Yeah, there was a small period of time where LA, the SoCal group Dakota, was using those old boards in last edition. So I think at his big team, All Valley team tournament, the 3-player team tournament, the largest one in the U.S., one of the boards in the first year was the arena boards with doors, the door concept from what we currently have, just on those boards. So he just used those black spots on those old arena boards, and you know what? That was probably totally fine and fun.
Sure. Well, and that's so they've got the kits come with doors, it's 3D stand-up doors, and I was thinking of applying that to some of the walkways and stuff on Beta Decima, and it's just seeing how that works. It could be an interesting thing. I'll come back with how it works.
Yeah, and they also in there was little crates and barrels and stuff like that was light cover within. For anyone that doesn't know what this was way back in the Kill Team, the 2018 version of Kill Team, which was a totally different rule set. We kind of chatted about it a little bit in last week's episode by the time you'll have heard this. But the terrain was just a flat board that had walls drawn on it, and then the couple of pieces of 3D terrain are these doors that just little standing plastic doors, and you can slide them around to indicate they're open or closed. And then there was a couple other pieces of scatter terrain, whether it was just there was literally instructions. It was like, here's like 5 different ammo cans, glue them together like in this pattern to make a barricade. So there's a couple little like, yeah, just like light barricades. It's like the earliest, the grandfather of light barricades.
And if it tells you how much of a fan of all this material it is, that I've got those things, and yet I'm just now getting around to TOing and playing. So
no shame in that.
Yeah, and you do have a long history with 40K, as we kind of touched on, because like you've done a lot for 40K events. You want to talk just like Wave Tops about that as well?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I've had the pleasure of Travis, you had Kill Team. I've done some work for GW, which has been an honor, and really appreciative of being able to be part of that team. My brother, Chris Powell, and I, he runs really as the mastermind behind it, but he's got Warzone Events, which is he's got a team in the Southeast that runs. We have a big event in February, and then he runs different events all throughout the year. And other than some other work stuff I got, because I am currently serving in the Army right now, I am excited to hopefully bring Kill Team into that as another one of the games that he runs. Because it's not just 40K. We do Bolt Action. We do Age of Sigmar and Middle Earth, BattleTech, Underworlds, and so we've had some interest with Infinities, as far as skirmish games go. But we're looking to I'm looking and excited to get Kill Team up and running in that fold of games that we host. And so I've also, done regular TOing throughout just different areas. Fortunately, with my adventures in the Army, I've been able to bounce around and join different communities. I've been part of amazing communities in Colorado and Texas and Kentucky. And it's really great when I go to some of these events like Adepticon or Gen Con or LVO or what have you, because I'm sure y'all feel the same. It's got this almost family reunion kind of feel to it as you run into all these people that you've seen from all over these different events. You go to the World Champions at Warhammer, and there's all folks from all. I've heard you've talked to people from across the world, really, and to be able to have them come to that event and be able to spend some time together and see each other in person, share a game, share a drink, what have you, really great. And so my time as a TO, it's been a real pleasure to do that. I think I really kind of started picking it up about 2017, 2018, and so I've been doing it for just around 7 or 8 years right now, and so some good time spent with folks. And it's been interesting listening to some of the other folks you've had on the show. Really awesome to hear their experiences too, as they're in their own communities or they're learning or developing, and from what all of y'all have shared as well. And it's just something, it's funny to see kind of the spectrum of the timeline and maturity of where different people are at in their journeys as TOs or players or what have you, and my own. And I had my, not that I can't play competitive, not that I can't clearly judge competitively or what have you, but also just understanding, different communities and their needs, and kind of what, if a community is leaning to be competitive, where you can lean into that and how you can help grow that community and to be good competitors, right? Because it's we talk about and we joke about, it's funny, the being sweaty gets thrown a lot around in a lot of different contexts. I can't say that I hold it in necessarily just from my perspective, and so not against anything that some folks may have for it. I don't necessarily want being sweaty to be the goal for myself, right? But I understand, like, there's a good connotation of being sweaty where it is like a good competitive work, right? Like it's rigorous effort and in competitive nature, and so that's a good sweat, right? Like that's the sweat you get from a good workout, and that's the kind of competition that you want to be a part of. When you go to something and it's an event and it's like the Olympics and you're competing for something amongst people, good competition, that's what you want. What you don't want is you don't want a bad experience of the bad sweatiness, right? The smelly sweatiness, if you want to put it in that context, where it's a bunch of people who are not having a good time and they're constantly at each other and they're not walking away from it enjoying each other because they all smell and they all stink and they don't feel good coming out of it. That's not the good sweat that you want. And so it's just been an interesting thing that I've seen as it's come around in the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's actually, you want competition to be this idealized thing where everyone is running side by side and one person is pushing harder and gets to the end and you're like, everyone sits at the back and claps. But the real unfortunate truth of, being a human and running into these high stress events is not everyone can be as gracious at the time, but hopefully everyone learns to be more gracious over time as they go to these sorts of events. So it's kind of like a journey that's a little hard for TOs. I think there's a little bit of, when you choose to be the TO, you end up sometimes taking on kind of like the protector figure of your community. And that can be a little bit of a weird position for some people who just want to play games.
Right. But it's an important role. It's an important position. It's an important thing, knowing that, I mean, you're helping other people to kind of get through it. And a lot of folks, it's we've talked about it and I've heard y'all talk about it. There's some thankless aspects to it. And some communities are really good at thanking their TOs and whatnot, just as much as the TOs thank their community and their players for participating. But it's a different aspect, and it can be a difficult time dealing with some of the unfortunate confrontations that may arise or what have you, and just kind of working through that as you're all trying to enjoy this game that we love.
Yeah. Has some of your experience in 40K or in the Army helped inform how you have come to build up like these skill sets? Is there anything that you feel like you could share to any of the newer TOs or even some of the experienced TOs who still hang out and listen to us week to week as we, continue to talk to competitive players instead of other tournament organizers around the world?
Sure. Yeah. So, before kind of going down a greater list, one of my favorite things to do with folks is remind them that they have to play this game with the other person. Like in the middle of the conversation, it's like, hey, y'all, are y'all okay? Like, we're going to have a good game. We're going to be good. Because, you got another hour and a half on the clock. Like, nobody's going anywhere. So like, let's try and make this work out. It's kind of sometimes, and I don't mean for that to be condescending or to wear on people, but it is a good reminder, I think, for some folks, because they sometimes they get caught up with the game aspects. And a good anecdote from a 40K game is that I showed up to a table, and this will lead into another part too, but showed up at this table and the players were having an issue. They discovered halfway through the game that they'd been playing the game wrong, and so and they'd been scoring and there was no going back.
Classic 40K problems.
No rewinding, right? And in a lot of war games, this could happen, but it's one of those where unfortunately, halfway through the game of a game of 40K, you're an hour and a half to 2 hours in, and they couldn't resolve it, and so really the way they were playing it wrong was not a huge deal. It wasn't so bad, and so I brought up that we could go about it this way, you could go about it that way. The one way I offered that I recommended was that they just keep playing it wrong. They just keep playing it that way because technically it wouldn't change anything outside of how they were going about scoring, which it's not the same as everyone else's game, but ultimately the two people that were playing understood it incorrectly the same, and they were playing it that way. So they're just playing in like this alternate dimension for this one game. And I was like, all right, are you good? Are you good? And they both agreed. They're like, yep, we'll just keep playing like that. I was like, hey, like, this is the time. If there's an issue with this, then we need to either get the other, the head judge over here or what have you. But if we're good, like, we're going forward. So they both signed off. They both said, yep, Roger, okay, and moved out. Because ultimately, again, like, the objective is to have a good game with the other person, not to like, let something like this just totally break it down. So anyways, unfortunately, we get to the end of the game and one of the players that is clearly going to lose this was not in a good spot about it. He's like, well, if we just played the game correctly. I was like, if you played the game correctly, I'm not sure it would have mattered, man. Like, I'm telling you right now, the way that it was played doesn't change like how that went one way or the other. But to that, I was like, but did you have a good game? And like, well, yeah, we had a good game. I was like, okay, so how do you want to resolve this now? Because you both agreed to play it incorrectly, and you continued. Like, we went through that mechanic, and again, this is not there's not a critical point, because I'll tell you right now, this was not the top table. This was not the top 20 tables. This was not anybody that was necessarily this is Tacoma. This is a massive event. This was table like way down past 100 on the second day. And so they're not like in this competitive running. And there's a whole other attention that should be given to those tables. No offense to everyone that's on the 100th table. But at this point, like, we know where the top tables are. And so at this point, you're just playing for the experience, to have a good game and have a good time. And the other player, of his own volition, without any recommendation or prompting from me, said, hey man, let's just call it a tie, and that's it. And the other guy was like, the other guy was still working through the sweatiness that he had over this event. And I was like, is that amicable? Are we good? He said, yep. And they shook hands, and I think they walked away better with it, right? And so, like, ultimately, how did that change? Like, it didn't affect the event, but it was that two people walked away with it without them being just in the worst spot ever. Like, it could have gone far, far worse, but had they just played it correctly from the get-go, they could have avoided it. And so there's some rules pieces to that. The other part is that, like, sweatiness, personally, I value the experience of playing with people, right? Like, I'm there to play games with people, not just to win. Winning is cool, and that's a fun thing, and we all inherently enjoy winning, and there's a whole aspect to that. But if I find myself on day 2 on table 150, I'm not going to play any less than I would normally play, but I'm also not going to just throw games or just walk away from it, if that makes sense, right?
You can still be a good human even in awkward situations, and I think that's like the beauty of the competition. And personally, why I like going Swiss, because I don't really care where you end up. You just play your games, do your best, and then just see where you stack up, because that's part of the fun. Obviously, that's not always the case. At GW we do cuts, which I think also inherently incentivize a little bit more competition, which can be good and bad depending on which bracket you end up in. Adepticon, we had a player who was going through a rough time on Saturday, end up going into a bottom bracket, but then winning the bottom bracket, so it gave him a little pick him up before leaving the tournament. So I think there's good aspects for Swiss and not Swiss. So I think for tournament organizers, reminding people to be human is also very important for our growing scene, because we're all kind of in the same spot, just playing a game that we like playing.
Yeah, 100%. So that's that kind of part of just kind of recognizing who you're dealing with, whether you're a player or a TO, and then a lot of it, people do appreciate degrees of when I say authority, I'm not talking about some kind of governing, but it is a degree of governance, right? Like, they appreciate that there's a structure, they want to see things, and people want feedback. I mean, Travis, we saw that, right? Whether it was paint judging or what, people want the feedback. And so, I always, if you're going to be a TO or a judge, like, be like that's the part of presence, of jumping in and giving that feedback and making sure that you're engaged, and providing kind of that. You really want two-way dialogue to a certain point, right? I do appreciate being and I've joked about it before, being a judge versus being a player, is that when you're a player and you have these deliberations, ultimately, if you don't settle and you don't come to it, then you have to turn to a judge, or you have to find some way to settle, right? But the judge is ultimately, when you're a judge, it's not that you don't have to have the dialogue, but you don't necessarily have to have the argument that comes with it. You can just say, well, I'm the TO, and welcome to my event. What I say in the final call is what we're going to go with. And if I make a mistake, which it's kind of your job to try not to, but if you make a mistake, it happens and we move through. But at least the game progresses. We move forward, and we're not hung up on something. So I think it's recognizing that and continuing to move through that. It can be difficult for some folks, and the confrontation. It doesn't have to be confrontation in such a way that it's a fight, because I'm not, using the term gentle may not feel right for some folks, but there is a gentleness that comes with how you conduct yourself in your dialogue as a TO too. I don't think that it is helpful to be, too sharp or loud in certain cases, especially when other people are already kind of in their own head with certain issues. So just something, that I'd throw out there as well.
And Jason, you're starting to spin up a couple more tournaments in the near future. So any of these things that me and Red both have our own opinions about how to TO. You've actually played in a bunch of events that I've TO'd in now. So, what kind of lessons do you feel like you would want to take for yourself and give to other tournament organizers that are listening in, or people who are, on the fence about starting their own scenes?
Yeah. Well, I definitely am planning to really drive home sportsmanship at the beginning of the event and just talk about that's kind of always been one of the things that stands out to me the most is a good spiel at the beginning is an important thing, and then also just kind of living up to that as I would go around and make calls and settle things is just try to bring that energy, we've kind of been touching on repeatedly, that you're here with another human being, and we're all here to play games and have fun and hopefully meet new friends. So if that is more important than the ruling and the game to me, and to try to hopefully other people, that is also important for them as well, and just kind of cultivate the community in that way, and just be graceful with myself with making rulings, and try to be as accurate as possible. And if I learn something was wrong later, then just kind of add it to the list of things to get right next time. And yeah, I mean, there is a lot that goes into it, but I think it'll be a fun and rewarding experience. I'm also planning to noodle around with streaming some games, just a really simple setup, as I kind of have mentioned before. I think that'll be a fun thing for for the players. It's if you get to play on stream, you can watch your recorded game later and learn stuff from it. For people that can't make it to the event, they can still kind of feel more like they're part of the community, especially if there's a live chat and there's a commentator that you're talking to. It's it's another social kill team event that even people that aren't there get to be social about. I think is a fun and amusing concept.
Yeah. I do think that Kill Team is in a better spot for it, just compared to something like 40K, because 40K can take just a long time to watch, and can be a little hard to watch sometimes for me, on the outside, because considering the only thing that I watch on 40K side is 40K in 40 minutes, basically, just because they keep the pace moving.
Yeah.
True.
Yep.
Yeah. At least in Kill Team, with a 2-hour time span and, enough discussion while you're going, you can generally hear people's through lines quite a bit. And it's not just I'm just going to move this and I'm going to shoot this and you're going to roll saves. It's a lot of, if I move here, can I see this guy? If I move here, can your guy see this guy in cover? Am I in cover from somebody? So at least there's conversation if you want it, if you want to have it on a stream.
Sure.
Yeah, especially if a new player hasn't ever come across any concepts like that, watching a stream game where that's how people are talking and you get to visualize it and you're whoa, this is a whole other game. I feel is a
100%.
Huge opportunity for just people watching the game to level up, because we kind of mentioned, Red, you especially mentioned at the very beginning, reading the book and seeing the game in action is two completely different things. And you can read something a million times, and when you see it on the table, it's whoa, this really has a much bigger click and a way bigger impact. And Kill Team is the ultimate game of that is extremely true.
The fight phase alone, right? I had to go back and watch, I think 2, 3 maybe different streams just until I really felt comfortable. And I know this sounds silly, but just how the dice match up against each other, right? Because reading the book, it doesn't, it just in that the book or the Kill Team Light rules or whatever, like when you each roll your dice for the attacks and then how it pairs off from there, like it doesn't read as directly as I might have appreciated. Yeah, and so I mean, I had to pull up streams. I had to pull up some other like games that people had actually played, just watch how they go through it to make sure that I was getting the sequence right.
Yeah, I keep on trying to like tweak the way that I explain the fight sequence to new players. So I think like the way I kind of like where I'm at now is like both players roll their dice, and then starting with the attacker, you take turns striking to deal damage to each other. But the one thing that you can do to kind of change it up a little bit is when it would be your turn to strike, you can instead parry, and that removes one of your opponent's remaining dice. And then all of a sudden, because like if you don't know how it works, it seems like you strike and now there's this floating damage that I can parry before it gets, and that's like the most common first impression of how fighting works, but it isn't how it works.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, you know, again, having listened to all of your shows up to this point, and you know,
you're in the show.
Now I'm in the show, right? It's really funny because whether through subliminal messaging or whatever, and if this maybe saves you from having to hit the repeat on the same thing, because so I listen to this stuff on Spotify during my workouts, and so it's just gone on repeat, and but I could probably, Jason, almost do verbatim your Crossfire ad, but I have questions about it because I've been looking at it and I saw you have it, right? You have the thing, you had it at the event.
Yep.
And so I actually have been looking at getting my own stuff, and I had questions about that, about the Crossfire stuff.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
And so I want to get it, and I was looking at, you had the scorecard thing, you had the scorecard lid.
Yeah, that's
right?
the lid of the box. Yeah.
Right. And then did you get the inset for what's the difference between their faction version? I know they have like some really great write-outs, but it's different. Like, again, same thing, just like we were talking about with the game, reading versus listening or talking to someone about it. The 3mm inset for tokens, does that account for faction tokens? Is that, when they say the 3mm, is that accounting for their tokens that they sell, or what?
So I guess I got before I even knew what all the different items were, I had like the whole complete set. But so like the box itself is like what is this? This is like 8 by 6 inches or something. And then it holds all of your universal equipment and the scorecard, and then there's another little box inside, which is probably more like 2 by 5 inches. And then that's the one that holds all the objective markers, and then it holds all of, like, it can fit regular tokens, like the cardboard ones that GW makes. Then he also has the 3D printed tokens, and then he also makes faction tokens that are the same, like 3D printed, like they fit in there snug and they don't rattle around, whereas like the cardboard ones,
there's space.
Yeah, there's space in there for those. So it's kind of like more of
you can fit all. You're talking about like ladders and stuff. You can fit all that in the box.
Yep, and then you can fit all the, like, in the actual box itself. So that's like the box that has the scorecard lid. There is a compartment that you can fit all of your cards, all of your universal equipment. It's got spots to fit dice. So it's like you can put your 1 by 2 by 3 measuring tools in a perfectly fitted slot. The ladders, barricades, heavy barricades, the razor wire, just like everything in here with your universal equipment, measuring tools, cards, dice, and everything fits in there, which is super duper cool.
Well, and that's, so having done this for 2 decades at this point, I'm all about like all these little things that people have created along the way that help make things more useful, right? I mean, like, finally, I don't know how long it took, but now that GW's selling like objective markers for 40K, I mean, I have one for just about all the factions, and then a lot of times, much like I'm finding with my kill teams right now, it's how many I have versus how many I play is a different story, and then it's also sometimes easier to ask me which ones I don't have before I tell you which ones I do have. But the other part, the flat objective markers, I saw the ones. I mean, I'm a huge fan of that kind of. Is it is there? I saw you showed me the place where your objective marker, the tokens can go, but what about the flat, like what is that, 3 inches effectively?
Yeah, so
Or
it's
well,
like
it's
the
40
A
millimeter
little
with an
less than
inch out.
3.
Yeah,
it's
close.
a
Yeah.
little like it's a little ring that you so there's the 40 millimeter objective marker, then you put the flat ring over the top, and there's actually a cutout in the corner, and it's so subtle because these rings are like a 16th of an inch thick. And it's
Yeah.
literally like the kit, if you get a full kit, there's rings for the smoke grenades, which are also like the same thickness, they're just smaller because it fits around the 20
Oh,
millimeter
cool.
token. And then there's also
Yeah.
rings for the objective markers. And then there's like a little cutout where you can put the smaller ones for like smoke grenades and stuff like that, and like mines in, and it just like slots in perfectly. And then you just kind of shift it until like you kind of like almost feel it like click. It doesn't like actually click, but it kind of like feels like it. And just your little control range rings will just like click into a perfect little spot that's also there for it.
That's awesome. No, that's great. That's, I mean, exactly what I was looking for. So that's great. And I the 3D printed one, in a previous show, y'all talked about it. Like the tokens do stand out more. Like having played and like I'm playing with a bunch of new people, and like the ability to flip it over where it's not just the white on top of orange goes gray. Like that doesn't.
Wow.
I get where they were going with it, but it's not enough.
One of GW's decisions of all time was to have the reverse face of your token just blend in with the mat. You're like, all right, cool. I have no idea where my tokens are. I have so many extra tokens from tournament organizing on this edition of Kill Team already. Which is, it's pretty funny. I do think it's the shape is actually a good shape too, because
It is.
if you're not doing the proxy model thing, having the slight indent means that when you move your model, generally you kind of guess pretty close to where your models start off if you're not being too budgy when you move your models around. And I think the Crossfire set actually comes together really nicely. It feels good, and it's pretty well made. And Jason's been having a fun time with it. We saw a bunch of people at Adepticon with it, so I wouldn't be surprised if it shows up a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm looking. I wanted to. I haven't pulled the trigger yet, but I'm pretty confident I'm going to here shortly. Now that I've gotten some feedback, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's really cool, and it's definitely my favorite third-party accessory. For real.
Sure. Yeah. I can see why.
And,
I mean, I looked around at some of the other stuff, and I think that their stuff's it's up there. So
yeah, I think Dakota's stuff, Luster's Workshop, if the shop is open right now, is also pretty good. It's pretty compact. It's just a larger, it's like wider, and it is mostly just for the tokens rather than Crossfire Gaming being kind of everything in one box, which is nice. And I think there's good and bads for everything. Crossfires is a bigger, bulkier thing in your backpack, but it does more stuff. Whereas Dakota's, he has another thing where you can store stuff in a magnetized box, but it runs a little bit more of a premium with the laser cutting and the acrylic. And I'm sure there's going to be other things, especially on 3 years from now when we switch another version of Kill Team and we throw away all of the random stuff that we have. So we'll see where that looks like.
now that I'm in 10th edition of 40K, I can't. I'm so inundated with that process that I don't even think twice about it. Like, it's just, you get what you get for the time that you're playing and you need it, and you just move on. Like, if this new, there's a new competitive mode or a new
that's
generation.
True. There's a new 40K set of mission decks and stuff.
That's right. And okay. All right. New cards, I did, it's like, hey man, we're talking to some folks. We better stick with these objective markers, because I'm not going back. If you reduce objective range by an inch or something, we're gonna talk. So
yeah, I think a little bit of stability is probably a good thing going forward, and that's actually one of the things that I hope GW takes in mind on why other competitive games have grown so much. Is that if you don't change every single facet every single time, and you're changing small stuff around the edges, people will have a lot more confidence to just build up their skill set. And I think that this version of Kill Team was a really good push into a new direction from the first edition the last edition of Kill Team. Because the first edition of Kill Team, I'm glad that we took that one and chucked it all the way out, because we don't need to play mini 40K. No one's here for that.
There you go.
Yeah, and like speaking of the big changes versus small changes, like there's been pretty steady and consistent, like people's socks are rocked with the whole classification system. Which first of all, it's not the end of the world, because you can still play those factions. It's like for the tournaments, like bring the newer stuff. We don't want to maintain 20 million factions in the balanced data slate. But also it is valid that it's like, oh man, like just like the feeling that my favorite faction is going to be rotated. I just like put up the guide to Phobos, which is one of the factions that's going to rotate first, and there was like quite a few comments and feedback of like, oh man, it's a shame this team's going to rotate. So that's just kind of like one more omen for the stability train. People appreciate knowing things ahead of time and being stable in the game.
That's right.
Well, Red, if there was a time, we're towards the end of the podcast, so there's time to talk about Forge the Narrative or your upcoming local Learn to Play RTT one more time before we head out into the distance, or your local game store, now's the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Check us out, Forge the Narrative. Listen to Paul, Tanya, Adam, and myself. We try to put out an episode regularly. We usually talk about 40K pretty consistently. We talk about lore. We talk about, and Adam, and Paul, they're the voices you hear more often than not when you're watching any of the major streamed events for Games Workshop events or what have you. They were at Adepticon. You hear them at the Opens. You hear them. They're at LVO, and so you can hear them plus me talk. Every once in a while, they let me run wild on military stuff. Travis, you've had to endure some of that, so you know how I can ramble sometimes in that regard. But so Forge the Narrative, we're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, what have you. We've got some merch and stuff. If someone were to like us so much they wanted to wear a T-shirt, it's out there. And I've run into people. There were people at that were playing at Adepticon in the Kill Team events that had listened, and so appreciate anybody out there that wants to take some time to listen to us ramble each week. And then Warzone events, you'll see us warzoneevents.com comes up with a lot of the events that we're planning forward and that are out there. Usually we do a lot of 40K and Age of Sigmar, and then every once in a while we do these bigger events. I think my brother's next big one is MomoCon, which is happening in Atlanta in May. It's the same weekend that DreamHack's happening in Dallas, and the Dallas Open is happening there in Dallas. So just, if you can't happen to make it out to one of those bigger events in Dallas and you're interested in a 40K event, I think we're also hosting a 40K narrative. So some cool stuff there. And then, of course, if you're in the Columbus, Georgia area, closer to Fort Benning, and want to learn to play Kill Team or show up and assist as we kind of help build up this Kill Team community, I'd love to see you there. That's happening April 27th. We're doing that. We'll start around 1. We're doing some shorter game time frames than what you'd normally allot, but it really is a group of people just learning to play and kind of move through. And I'll have some of the competitive setups and try and walk through some of the mechanics and make sure everybody's on the same page as we start to build out the community.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks for bringing me on. I really do appreciate this. As again, having listened to literally every episode you have now, and then to be in an episode, I really do appreciate you letting me come on here and talk. It's been awesome. It's awesome, Jason, meeting you for the first time at Adepticon, and Travis, I've really appreciated our time to engage in friendship. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Look, it's an important part about connecting to communities is making sure that all of the new communities still feel included, because it's a big world and it's a complicated world nowadays. So having a safe haven, in our hobby, I think has been a big part of why we're still doing this to this day, right, Jason? Yeah, absolutely. Sweet, yeah. Well, this was super fun. And as always, thank you, listeners, for listening until the end.